welcome everyone to the December 2013 meeting of the Board of Education of the Granville Exempted Village School District. And I invite you all to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And welcome. It's a treat to see everyone here, especially since we're here to celebrate what you've been doing. So, Mr. Sobel, would you like to call the roll?
Ms. Deeds.
Here.
Mr. Janice.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Rentel.
Here. Thank you.
You ready?
I am.
Excellent. Tonight, we begin by honoring our girls soccer team. These girls understand the value of teamwork. Their accomplishment this year is no secret to the fans that came out to support this team and their winning season. Highlights from this year include defeating DeSales on their home field, getting over the hump, so to speak, by winning against Bloom Carroll, which enabled them to play in the district finals for the first time in the history of our program. Nikki Cox breaking the previous school record of 29 goals, finishing the year with an extraordinary 50 goals. Pulling out a 1-0 victory versus Kettering Alter in the Final Four with the defensive performance of the year. And advancing to the state finals and having the opportunity to play in Crew Stadium for the state championship and finishing second in the state. We want to congratulate the girls and Coach Scott Forrester, but before we bring the girls up for their certificates, I just want to say, you know, I watched a couple of games, and actually the game against Kettering Alter was the night of the Levy. So I had to run after that to go see the election results, and it was a close one as well. And I remember saying, you know, no one will remember whether it was 54 votes or 1-0. What matters is a win is a win. And you guys won, and you won with class. And that's really amazing. The other thing I'd like to say is, in the state championship game, you were absolutely fantastic. And I want to compliment your coach as well, Scott, because that team was a very good team. They were very well coached, and they had a couple of spectacular players that, honestly, I saw some things on that field that I haven't seen soccer players do before. And what you did at halftime and how you adjusted was really amazing. And you came out and really made that a close game where, you know, it could have gone either way. So I know as a somewhat novice soccer fan, I really enjoyed watching all of you play this year. And for that, we congratulate you and we commend you. And I am going to bring you all up here, and we're going to, at some point, try and take a picture with everybody, okay? So, I'd like Amelia Anderson, Taylor Beitzel, Tatum Brogan, Allison Brunn, Katie Choice, Nikki Cox, Taylor Drum, Jacqueline Fouts, Ryan Kauchek, Chloe Kent, Journey Link, Keena McCombs, Carolyn Mestamaker, Kelsey Moore, Sarah Owen, Mallory Reiser, Riley Rosinski, Monica Sitters, Olivia Simon, Sydney Smith, Ilya Taganides, Ashley Tasker, and Riley Wells to all come up. Now, I'm not going to pass these all out right now. I'll just hand them to Amelia, and you can pass them out to your teammates. And then Coach Scott Forrester, and...
Did we forget anybody?
Gabby? Oh, Gabby Mayo.
Of course. She's on the list. At the top of the list.
Yeah,
And Tory Lund.
Gabby Mayo. Did I say Journey Link? Okay, I'm sorry. I was reading through the list. Come on up. For a photo. There you go.
We've done this many times.
You good?
Moms,
All right.
moms, do you want to take a picture? Dads?
Oh, wait, one more coming, yeah. All right.
I say this all the time, but this is what paparazzi's like.
All right, very good.
It begins to make sense.
Okay, next, we are going to honor the AP environmental students who took a class project and turned it into an incredible opportunity for the district. The students had a vision to build an outdoor classroom environment for the students and took the initiative to develop a strong partnership with outside nonprofit organizations to make that happen. Our board saw the overwhelming potential of this project and gave unanimous approval last spring to make it happen at Granville Intermediate School. The students held meetings at GIS to educate student council members about the program and then worked with a group of art students who volunteered their time to make a banner for the groundbreaking ceremony held in November. The outstanding students presented their project last month at the OSBA Capital Conference, where they won an award for an outstanding program. Tonight, we honor them for that achievement. We are extremely proud of their accomplishments. These students, along with Jim Redding, embrace the value of partnerships in learning and will leave a legacy for future students to discover. Before I bring them up, I have to comment. For those of you who froze through the windstorm of the groundbreaking, it was pretty amazing because right before we started the ceremony, a bald eagle flew in and circled around. And it was like, well, build it and they will come. So there you go. So Amelia Anderson, second award winner tonight. Linnea Bigley, Ivy Gilbert, Brian Janice, Janet Gregory, Danny Hussey, and Isaac Sundin. Come on up. And then Jim Redding, come on up as well, teacher of the AP Environmental Studies. And we're going to take pictures over there as well. Is that it? That concludes our accommodations. Now, this is the point where you guys can all leave. If you want, if you don't want to, if you want to stay and watch the board meeting, you can. You know, I encourage you some to, but it is finals week and I know you have to study. So, thank you very much for coming.
Good job, Ivy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. I'll have you know, Jeff, I coached Elia in soccer when she was in elementary school.
Yeah. So you're taking credit.
Oh yeah, all the credit. 4 of those girls actually were on my teams when they were like second graders. I don't know if they remember. Take care, Annie. Take care, Rich.
Clear the place.
Yes.
How tall is he though? Oh, I was Brian.
Not Brian, you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to those who have elected to slog it out with us. What's
Public
next?
comment.
Oh, great. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment? If so, please come to the rostrum, introduce yourself.
Is it? Go ahead and
Emma's looking for something.
Okay, staff reports.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tom Fry and Ryan Burnett, high school principal, and they're going to talk a little bit about the high school graduation requirements. I promise this is going to be a riveting presentation about things that are happening at the state in relationship to graduation requirements. The first caveat as they're setting up that I'd like to make is all of this is still under discussion, but we think it's getting to the point where we want to talk a little bit more publicly about that. But there is a major asterisk associated with this presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Fry.
Okay, thank you. As Mr. Brown said, this is still, there's possibly more changes to come. That's why we're saying this is the November 2013 proposal of the new graduation requirements. With Ohio implementing the new learning standards this year and the next generation assessments soon to come, the state wanted to put out sort of what this meant for senior or for high school students specifically. So the course completion requirements, which is different from saying everything students need to take, these are courses specifically. This will be a change for the minimum at the state level. This really doesn't look very different than what our current standards are for a lot of students. Districts always have the ability to ask for more than what the state minimum is. And so we have 4 units of English, math, 3 units of science. Social studies is 3 units, but there must be at least a half, within those 3 units, wait, no, this is on top of these 3, right? Okay, I have to make sure I say it right. Of the 3, American history and American government must be a part of that. Currently, our government course is a full year course. That'd be something we're actually a little different. A half unit of health, half unit of physical education, and then 5 units of electives. Within our district, we also give financial literacy through our economics course and financial literacy course. So that would be an elective, considered at the state level, but for us, that's a requirement, and that's when we do that. Other districts may have their financial literacy within their government course, for example. The other thing is that it does allow for districts to utilize the test out option for credit flexibility. That would be where a student hasn't necessarily taken a course, but feels like that they have the knowledge and can actually just take the test, get a certain score on the test, and get credit for the course.
In addition to the course requirements, one of the things that will always be part of the state graduation requirements is end-of-course testing. We've gotten very familiar with the OGT over the last however many years that's been around. The state is now moving to end-of-course exams, and what you'll see up here is students will have to take 10 end-of-course exams after they take certain courses in high school. 3 in language arts, that'll be English 9, English 10, and English 11. 3 in mathematics, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Science will be biology and physical science, and social studies will be government and U.S. history. Kind of an interesting side note of that, the social studies test for government right now, they're talking about 20% of that government test will actually be material covered in U.S. history, which is why we shrunk the gap between when students take government and U.S. history this past year, where juniors are taking government and will from this point on. From those tests then, students will earn scores on each test from 1 to 5, much like AP testing that we're all very familiar with at this point. So a student can earn a maximum of 50 points, they can earn a minimum of 10 points. They will need 25 points to graduate. That 25 points cannot be spread out in any fashion that they see fit to graduate. They'll have to have a minimum score in each of those subject areas. For example, a student can't get all 5s in the 3 English exams and get all 1s in the math test and graduate. They have to score a minimum of 6 points total in the English Language Arts 3 exams and on the math 3 exams that they'll take there as well. So they could hypothetically say a student got a 4, a 1, and a 1, which we hope they wouldn't do, but that would get them to the magical 6 points. They have to average at least a 2 on the English Language Arts and math. Science and social studies, same thing, but there's only 2 tests there, so they only have to score a total of 4 points. Kind of the interesting piece to that is if a student scores 2 points in all of those tests, they only have 20 points towards graduation. So they actually have to, at some point, score above 2 in some of those subject areas to get to the 25 points. That's going to be the benchmark for graduation. Students can retake any exam they receive if they score a 2 or lower. If they want to retake an exam later, they scored a 3 or better, and they can, but they cannot do that unless they need it for graduation. So there's that little piece to it. But if they score a 2 or lower, they can retake that exam. Any 12th grader can retake any exam at any time. Tom already mentioned that the district's moved that testing out option for credit flexibility. And one piece of this that they've been very explicit about is that students taking high school courses in middle school will not be double tested. So for example, we have a lot of students take biology and geometry in 8th grade right now. They would take those tests, they would not take the 8th grade science or the 8th grade math test, which I think is something we would want. We don't double test students when we don't have to. One other piece that they opened up the door on is other nationally recognized assessments could be replace some of these end of course exams. One that we were all familiar with and we've had around for a long time are AP tests. So a student takes AP English 11, for example. If they earn a certain score on that, they'll use a concordance table and say that score is equal to this score on the end of course exam, so students won't have to take both tests. They can just take the AP exam and that score can be banked for later towards that graduation requirements. They won't have to take both, which is a really smart move on the state's part. What these other nationally recognized assessments will be, we really don't know. It could include things like the end of course exams that we already give for the ACT, but that list hasn't come out yet, and I think that's something they're still working on. Another option is the districts can also give 8 exams instead of all 10. And the way that would work is the 2 that you can exclude from the testing are the English 9 and the Algebra 1. If a district chooses to do that, then the next tests in those sequences, so in English would be English 10 and 11, and Geometry and Algebra 2 and Math, would be worth 150% instead of just 100% because you have one last test. That has to be approved by a Board of Education, and we would want to give our students all 10 tests. The way our students perform on the end of course exams right now, they do very well in all of the English 9 and Algebra 1 included, and the math as well. We would want to include those tests in there because I think it would actually raise the stress level if those tests count even more for our students instead of spreading it out, so to speak. And like I said, they will do well on those.
The other reason for giving the 10 tests would be that we actually get information that helps us to get a sense of how our programs are doing in 9th grade and for Algebra 1. So we want to keep those assessments for that reason as well. So there's going to be an alternative way for students to show proficiency if they are unable to get to the full 25 points that Mr. Burnett referenced. So there are basically 3 different ways you're going to be able to do it. I'll start at the bottom and work my way up. So application is going to be one way that they haven't worked out exactly yet. It's going to phase in over time, so that won't be here right out of the gate. And it's going to be some type of capstone or other experience where you can apply your knowledge and show that you actually applied your knowledge. We'll allow you to earn some number of points. Presumably it'll be similar to the other 2 with 3 and 5, but they haven't exactly got that all figured out yet, but that is something that's coming. Then you're going to have the ability to demonstrate your career readiness. And so if you can earn a state-approved score on some career field assessment, you can get 3 points. If you can earn 5 if you can actually get it on some type of industry exam. And Mr. Burnett will talk a little bit more about some committees they're going to form and talk to work to make sure that more of these exams exist in the future. And then the last way is the demonstration of college readiness. And on the ACT, if you can get an 18, on the English portion, a 21 on the reading, or a 22 on the math portions, you can earn 3 additional points or 5 additional points if you can actually get to the honors level, which would be a 12-10 on the SAT or a 27 on the ACT composite score, so that's on the composite itself. So we talked a little bit about the points and what it takes. So we want to throw up some examples to help kind of make this a little bit more real. So we have 3 students A, B, and C. So student A, you can see how she scored on the 10 end of course exams. So she has earned a total of 38 points. The problem is, if these were her scores, she would not be able to graduate right now. Because you see in the math, she's only earned a 1. And so she would have to earn at least 6 points in math to be eligible to reach a minimum to graduate. Now I don't know, this is just to show an example. I don't know if we'd ever have a student that would score like this. But in English, she's fine because she's earned 15 points and she only needed to earn 6. Physical science and biology and the sciences, she has 10. She only needed to earn 4. And then obviously 10 also in U.S. history and government, where she only needed 4. Student B, however, has 25 points. And as you can see, has earned the 6 points necessary in English, 9 points in math, so definitely fine in English and math, 6 points in the sciences, and got just the 4 points needed for the social studies subjects. So 25 and would be in great shape. This last student, student C, hasn't got the 20 point, or has 20 points, so it doesn't have the 25 necessary for graduation, but one very important piece is that he has earned all the points necessary in each of the subject areas, 4 here in science and social studies, 6 in English and math, so that at least now they're eligible to show to earn points in other ways. Because if I don't at least get the minimum points in my subject, I'm not even eligible for these other areas. So it's important that I at least get to a 2 on all the exams I take, then I've hit that minimum threshold. And I think I talked through all these bullet points here. Yes. Do those examples make sense? Questions on? Okay. So just want to try to bring that
I
out.
understand them, but they don't make sense. But
Then finally, there's going to be this career technical option that is going to be phased in as well. So they're still working on this with the Southern Regional Education Board to create some assessments that can effectively measure both technical and academic content. The goal is for the 17-18 school year. And once those are created, it will fulfill Senate Bill 311 course requirements. Students will take both academic and technical assessments, and they'll be able to earn the required number of graduation points for each content area. Excuse me. And so these field assessments will allow them to work through that. This is an important point, that any student who gets the highest score possible on the last end-of-course exam in their series, it can actually override their previous end-of-course exam scores so that they could get extra points. So if we jump back to this example, if I imagine that this particular student, if he or she had gotten a 5 in Algebra 2, it can actually override her previous scores so they can get enough points potentially to graduate. Because the idea being, if all of a sudden I struggled on the earlier exams, but now in the more complicated exams I'm actually doing better, that I probably, if I would go and retake these other earlier exams, I would probably score better also. So why go through the expense and all the time for everyone to do that when I've shown I have such a high level of mastery on this now advanced course? I think that's a smart way to go about it, to save everyone a lot of time and money in that way. So 2 other things, students with disabilities, just as it is today, they could be exempt from the consequences of these graduation requirements. It will be a team decision, just as it is right now, but they would not be exempt from taking the assessments, just from the consequences. So they would at least have to take either the assessment or the alternative assessment, alternate assessment, which we already have today. So that works just like, it's the same as it is currently with the Ohio graduation test. And then just with adult education, which is still the same today, students can attend tuition free until their 22nd birthday. After that, other options such as GED are available.
One of the things that you'll see over and over as we give more information about this is the state wants to provide multiple pathways for students of all different types. And that's going to be that's a great thing for our students, but it's going to be very difficult for them to come up with all the different pathways that are actually present. So we'll obviously have to keep talking about this as the year progresses. The State Board of Education is also going to create what's called a Diploma Endorsement Council, or DEC. We need another acronym, I know, in education, but unfortunately that's what we're going to get. They're going to work with business and industry representatives, and they're going to create these endorsements for programs in the business and industry to align with certain tests. And then where there are no tests right now, they're going to have those align with, or create tests that align with industry standards, so students can get points towards graduation or get different endorsements. The Remediation Pre Endorsement is something they've been talking about for a couple of years now, and what the Board of Regents, what their goal is in this is a student that scores a certain score on these end of course exams for the state can enter a public post-secondary school in Ohio and not have to take a remediation course in the English language arts or math. So they're going to use that English 11 and Algebra 2 most likely score or their total score in all three of them, or their ACT score to say, yes, this student can enter our university and take a 100 level math and English course. And if they can't, they're going to take a 99 or 90 level course that will not count towards their graduation, but before we allow them to move on to the next level. The Elite Academic Honors is something that's very new. You can see it's they're not even talking about it until 2017, but they're going to identify the top 1/2, 2, and 4% of the graduating students in Ohio, how they perform on their first try on each of these exams, and look at their cumulative point totals and give them the designation of summa magna and cum laude designation, which is something that many colleges do at their graduation ceremonies. The honors diploma has really not changed much. These are the same requirements that we work with right now. A 3.5 on the 4.0 scale, a 27 on the ACT, and a 1210 on the SAT. And that's a 1210 on just the math and critical reading part. It's not the writing part included in that. So those are really no different than they are right now. For our students, there are other requirements in terms of how many courses they have to take. Like, for example, they have to take 4 math and science and so many global language courses, and so forth. Other endorsements that will potentially be available for our students. This is one I'm very excited about, especially with our work in getting students more globally aware, is the Biliteracy Seal endorsement. Students will have to take or attain a proficiency. Now, we don't know what that means yet, but I'm sure it'll be some sort of test that they'll have to take at the end in 2 different languages by graduation. So that'll be a gold seal that will appear on the diploma. And we do have many students that take multiple languages, and not always languages that we offer at the high school. I think right now we have students taking 10 different languages. If you look at our course description guide, we offer 3 at the high school. So our kids are really starting to branch out and take different languages. So that's an exciting change. And then finally, the Career Ready endorsement by 2016. Again, this goes back along with what Tom was talking about, the industry credentials, so that if you have this endorsement, you have the qualifying credentials or mastery to have a full-time position. You can serve in that career, or it can serve as the foundation maybe for additional training that you would need in that particular career or business industry. So all of these will need State Board of Education approval, and they have some pretty lofty goals in terms of the time frame for these as well.
So let's take a look at the transition plan. Excuse me. So we talked about the course requirements. So just kind of wrapping everything up together. So for the class of 2017, they'll have to take and pass all parts of the OGT. And actually, as soon as you start putting this stuff together, you get into a PowerPoint slide, and then things start to change again. So actually, it's even been updated since this. We just recently were made aware of House Bill 193, and we'll talk about it a little bit in the next slide, but this is likely going to actually move one more year down. So instead of 2017, it'll actually go down to the class of 2018. So all of this will probably actually move down by 1 year or 1 class. But the OGT initially will be around, and students will take the end-of-course exams. They're not going to be required to pass them or earn the points for graduation, but they are going to be required to take them. Excuse me. And so it's going to work for several different things. One is going to help us stay with field testing to make sure the items there are where they want them to be and determine these levels, 1 through 5. But it will also help with some of the endorsements that students are going to earn, or potentially going to want to earn, and for the remediation free piece. then you'll see that they're going to slowly start to phase in the exams. So as Mr. Burnett said, we are in favor of going with all 10 exams, not asking for board action to only have 8, but having all 10 right out of the gate. But what will happen is they'll phase in over time. So initially, it's the first 2 English, the first 2 math. I don't know that we know for sure the other choice, the other exam. But then we'll have, by the class of 2019, we'll have 8, and those will be required for graduation. We start to see where the points start to come into play. They step the points in just as more exams come on board. And then eventually we get to the class of 2022, where we should have all 10 exams up and running. Again, at this point in time, we'll see how legislation might impact this transition plan. We know it looks like it will be delayed actually 1 more year, so it'll actually go down to the class of 2018 still taking the OGT. So we'll talk a little bit about how this impacts Granville.
You know, one thing I really like about this is the state's not just looking at one end of course, or one exit exam, the OGT. They're giving students multiple pathways, as I mentioned before, and not just in the academic areas, but in the career technical areas as well. One of the things that we have some questions about for the state is the physical science piece. Right now, we have students that take a full year of chemistry and a full year of physics before they graduate. The physical science curriculum is a half of a year of chemistry and a half of a year of physics, so it's not near as inclusive or as rigorous as what our students are currently taking right now. So if they were required to say that all 9th grade students have to take physical science in the state of Ohio, that's a significant change in the way we are currently delivering that content. We don't have enough answers yet to really say what we're going to do with physical science. I can say we have plenty of options in place, worst case scenario and best case scenario. But we certainly need a lot more answers from the state in terms of what kind of exams can we use to potentially take the place of physical science, or do we truly have to offer this across the board? But in our view right now, it's a step backwards. We're offering a general science course when our kids are getting a full year of college prep, physics and chemistry right now, basically across the board. One thing I really like about this is the credit flexibility test out option. We now have a test that is used not just in Ohio, but across many other, almost 24 other states that we can use. So students that move within Ohio and from other states, we could have these scores and use that as, a student says, I want to test out a U.S. history. We now have an exam that is standardized that we can give them and get the opportunity to test out. And if they don't reach whatever benchmark they want to get to, then they can take the course and retake the test at the end of that. So I think it's a really nice option for our students to have.
And so just to be clear, we aren't making any changes to our science program at this point in time. We aren't going to take a step back. We believe there will be enough flexibility for districts like us that we will be able to use some type of replacement exam in place of physical science, because we believe it's much more important we give our students a full year of chemistry and a full year of physics. So just so we're clear there. It's set the floor and we're taking it up from there. At this time, we really don't know exactly what tests are going to be available or exactly when. I mentioned House Bill 193, and so with that coming out, it's moved the OGT. If this is passed as presented, it will move the OGT. It will move the OGT back 1 more year. So instead of the class of 2017 taking the OGT, it will move down to the class of 2018, and presumably move all of the other end-of-course exams back as well. It's not really a huge issue for us because we're currently giving end-of-course exams, the ACT end-of-course exams. All we would do is start to phase those out as the new next generation end-of-course exams come online. So we'll be giving end-of-course exams one way or the other. But we just don't know exactly at this point in time when it will go to the next generation exams. Sure.
So that, I just realized when you said this the second time, so the end-of-course exams are a package that will eventually be coming down as opposed to something that we generate here.
Correct. It is actually, I believe there's still 23 states that are working together in our park is what it's called.
So it's this, you're talking about the park assessments?
Yes, but what happened is once the state adopted them, they're basically ours. So if you look at what, I always try to use the language that the Ohio Department of Education uses. so that people know that it's not something different. So Ohio is calling them the next generation assessments. So that's what I'm going to call them, so that people don't get confused thinking it's something else. But yes, the park assessments, next generation assessments,
And
the same
of
thing.
course,
And of course exams, yes. They are at the kind of a test it is. End of course, because you take it whenever the course ends. So if I'm testing out, the end of the course is today. If I'm, you know.
right, but you're still
semester-
taking the park assessment, whether you take it today or you take it in June.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely. So, absolutely, yes, very good. For the class of 2018, there is this possible triple testing that could occur because the state is actually going to, the state in partnership with the Ohio Board of Regents is going to pay for every sophomore, every sophomore to take the PSAT free of charge as a way to show that they are remediation free, among some other things. So for that class, there is the potential that they're going to offer the PSAT for free. We're going to have our students go ahead and take that. Then you have the OGT, which will be required, and then potentially some in-course exams. So there's the potential for some triple testing there for some students. Now, we have some of this happening already because we have students who want to take the PSAT, also have taken the OGT or will be taking the OGT, and then are taking an in-course exam because we're giving those in-course exams currently in 11 subject areas. For us, there are additional graduation requirements that exist beyond what the state's going to require. We're offering, our students must take 1 credit of fine arts, which could span between foreign language, truly art, music, and technology. Yeah, thank you. And then we also have financial literacy piece, which is either our financial literacy course or it's wrapped into our economics course. And all of this still requires legislative action. So stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be more to come, possibly more changes. Although I would say a lot of what we've shown here today, there's so much level of detail on it that those things will be here to stay, like the endorsements. I don't look for some of those things to change.
I think it's important to recognize that this has been at least a 2-year conversation through 2 state superintendents and 2 general assemblies. So we've been having these conversations. I know last year when our state superintendent was Michael Sawyer, Ryan and I participated in a couple of conversations with ODE related to this graduation conversation. Some of the elements are similar, some of them are dramatically different. But we felt like it was time to start having the conversation about, right now our 9th graders don't necessarily know what their graduation requirements are for sure. So once House Bill 193 is passed and some other pieces of legislation are passed, then we'll have a clearer picture. But we think it's an important conversation to have.
And one other thing too, I don't remember if we said this or not, but we will be required to share with incoming freshmen prior to them starting their freshman year what their requirements are. So we will know what the requirements are because we must let students know prior to them starting their freshman year. So we should know something by the spring for our freshman.
What's your sense about what's the motivation for this? Is there, are they trying to raise the bar by changing the level of the exams? Or are they trying to offer more flexibility? Or what's broken with the current system they're trying to fix?
Well, I think both. What's broken with the current system is our current Ohio graduation test is not aligned to what we teach. So
Okay.
we don't teach an OGT math course. We teach algebra, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus. So it only made sense to move to exams that align to actually the content you teach. So that, I think, is a piece of it. We have the new Ohio Learning Standards that are in place. They're different than what the OGT was currently assessing, and so we need new assessments to align to that content, and the content's more rigorous. I think the state also wanted to step up the rigor of the assessments, and so you'll see, you probably remember from, was it over a year ago when we started showing some of those items and what they look like and how they look different from the current assessment questions. So
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of all that.
Okay.
And Tom, I would add one piece to that. I think there's accountability piece with OTES and the bringing of that on board, that the OGT, how do you pinpoint that to the effect of one teacher? If they're taking math 2 years before they take the test, well, which teacher had more of an effect? If they did really well or really poorly or just did what they were supposed to do. So, And a course exam, you're pinpointing it on one teacher, doing those subject areas, that's allowed for, you can use that for teacher growth and for accountability purposes at the state level. So I think that's a big piece to it as well.
The endorsements are interesting as well, right? That's kind of at a state level, and I'm not sure what we do from a local level in terms of endorsements or honors, diplomas, and so on and so forth, but it's just kind of curious they're moving that to a state standard as opposed to something that's locally controlled. But I like the concepts of them, and something like they're interesting, but I'm not sure how we kind of more personalize them or how we make them more relevant for Granville, and with this whole process, how we make it right for our district, because my sense is it's a state-developed thing, and even broader than that. I'm not sure what more local spin we can continue to have, like our own graduation requirements, which are elevated beyond that. So maybe this is an opportunity as this rolls in to rethink, the additional requirements that we put on students, the right additional requirements, or are there other guidelines or guidance that we can give, that are representative of what we want kids coming out of Granville to have.
I think it's important just for people to understand. I haven't heard a lot of this here, but I've heard some of this from my colleagues in other places where they have the sense that Ohio's new learning standards, or they'll just say the Common Core, is forcing people to sort of dumb down what they do. We're already above that, and all this did really for us was bring everybody else sort of closer to where we were already, what we were already expecting from our students. So
yeah, OGD hasn't really been our end-all, be-all for what we want Granville students to be, right? I mean, I think we have higher benchmarks than that, right? And I think that anytime you relook at it, it makes sense for us to look internally as well, right? To see, I don't know what could be different or how we could adjust that, or whether we could have our own, honors or endorsements of some sort that would be meaningful here.
This is all being developed out of ODE, right?
correct.
Do we know if they're looking at any other states with the real kind of reinvent the wheel themselves?
I don't know about other states other than,
I think they're having conversations and they're trying to align, but more of the alignment is going to happen in the actual test creation, in PARC, in generating the next generation assessments, as opposed to the specific graduation requirements, because every state varies.
Right, I just was
Yeah.
curious as to, just the process that you're going through. I mean, it was related to what your question, Tom.
And I think it's interesting because it is a function of ODE as a regulatory agency at some level, but all of this is requiring changes to statute. So, I mean, it's requiring changes to legislation. And that's why, something's developed at ODE, it has to go to the General Assembly, work through that process, and then potentially get kicked back to ODE. So we're kind of in a little bit of a cyclical conversation at some level.
it does seem like there are more conversations. I think the connection that I see more is OGE working more with OBR. So you'll have more regions in higher level education working more closely together. Definitely seems to be more alignment there in what's happening.
That is very true. Evidence of that is also the Chancellor of OBR, Ohio Board of Regents, has to, by December 31st, put together a proposal for the General Assembly related to post-secondary options, dual enrollment, and is it AP for credit. So right now, because of the new funding formula, it's not actually advantageous for districts to send kids out because we lose revenue, even though we potentially may offer the course here and with one of our teachers. So they recognize that there's a gap between the new funding formula and the structure of obtaining college credit. So that's something that is also on the docket for them to address.
Other questions?
Thank you, guys. I'm actually going to stand over here for.
Do you have a PowerPoint or you
No,
just? Okay.
no, it's just no PowerPoint.
This is one of the pages. And I'm going to invite Andy Wildman and Chris Gisborne to come on up. You guys can stand right here, just so everybody knows who you are.
There you go.
Yes, they're being called to the principal's office. As you know, the Granville schools have a long history with the Granville Recreation District. And we have a partnership that's solidified in how they were actually formed as a recreation district. And what I believe they provide to the children of Granville and to the adults of Granville is a service that is highly aligned with what the schools are trying to do as well. And as part of our conversations about ways to be more efficient, how to help offset taxpayer burden, and in the pursuit of finding ways to operate more efficiently, we entered into a conversation with the GRD about the potential of them locating within district office, which would satisfy a need for the Granville Rec District, for space requirements for their employees, and it would help us have more intentional conversation about shared services. At a minimum, sharing space helps our shared tax base offset some type of expenditure. And hopefully, in the future, realizing the economy of scale will also benefit both organizations. So there is an action item before you tonight to authorize me to enter into a lease agreement with the Granville Rec District for the use of the space that is right out that door. It's basically 2 office spaces, a conference room, and a front desk area. Actually, 3 office spaces, front desk area, and a conference room. What would be an example of a benefit to the Granville schools? One example of this is 2 years ago, we built that space so that we could have a front window presence. As you know, at different times in the day, people can walk in and out of district office and we not know who's here because we don't necessarily have a front door presence. This relationship would allow us to have personnel at the front window that can steer traffic either upstairs for the Granville schools or into the front room for the Granville Recreation District. That person would be also helpful in streamlining some of our processes. Right now, we have people in the summer enroll in buildings. Well, once July happens, the buildings are closed and people have to come to district office. What happens is kind of multiple hands touching new enrollees. And what we're trying to do is streamline that and centralize registration. Having a person at that front desk to have that conversation, cross-train that person to manage our enrollment process and get it into the hands of our EMIS supervisor or personnel is a very advantageous opportunity for us. One, it cleans up our data because you have less people handling it. It also helps parents because they're going one-stop shopping. And that's a real tangible opportunity for a shared service. We're also excited about the future of opportunities that we can pursue over time because it would allow us to have more frequent conversation with the Granville Rec District. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of brainstorming that we've done about some opportunities, but right now we want to start small and build on that. So I'd like to introduce Andy Wildman, Executive Director of the Granville Rec District, and Chris Skidmore, who is our new Director of Youth Services or Youth Sports. And so I will turn it over to them to make a few comments as well.
Great. We're just real excited about this opportunity. I think obviously all 3 of our strategic partners have been great to the Recreation District. They're the reason that we're formed. But we have so many common, so many commonalities with the schools. We have, a lot of serving the same constituents from a jurisdiction map. We obviously use sports as a very big part of what we do. We now, with the exception of swimming, run all of the youth sport programs in our community. And as we grow, I think that, as Superintendent Brown said, I think there's just so many opportunities for ways that we can look to save our constituents So just, real excited about the opportunity. Our existing office space, we have 2 offices. We have 4 employees working in those 2. We're adding an intern from Eastern Kentucky who's going to start with us after the first year. So just, having the space, meeting space can be sometimes tough for us at Village Hall. I think this room is probably more appropriately set up for coaches meetings and for parent meetings and for all those things as we grow. So very excited and just thankful. We work every day. Jeff, with the athletic director, Kevin Jarrett, all of the coaches. Coach Wade rolls out the red carpet for our kids every Friday night, actually invites the 5th and 6th grade football players to spend the afternoon with the high school team and to actually run on the field with them. So just to continue to grow on those things with all the programs. So Chris is new to Granville. Chris and his wife Kelly moved here from Oak Park. Chris has been here 3 months now, 2.5 months. Time goes by fast when you're as fun as Chris. So, Chris, will you say a few words?
I'd like to thank my mom. Happy to be here, obviously. Been here for several months, and I'm realizing in a short time just how vital a role youth athletics play in the community. And it's a great opportunity for me and for the GRD in general, so I think I landed in a great spot. In regards to moving over here, it seems like a natural fit in my short time here. I'm over at the schools almost on a daily basis, talking to principals, phys ed teachers, administrative assistants, coaches, anybody will listen pretty much. And it seems like a great fit, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity, hopefully. And yeah, that's all I have for it.
Thanks, Chris.
So with that, we can have future discussion for the action item, but I wanted to put kind of some names with the topic. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
Chris.
Okay. That takes us to the topic of board discussion. Wanted to circle back just slightly for a short period of time on the CTEC appointment. As you remember from our last board meeting, that there were some legislative changes about the construction of the JVS or CTEC board. And so we had a conversation as a board discussion about who would fill that role. Currently, Dr. Corman is filling that role. And based on the new requirements, we wanted to make sure that we had a conversation about it and intentionally appointed somebody at our January 6th meeting. So I'll open it up to brief comment and potentially one statement.
If everybody is amenable, I'm still interested in being our representative to CTEC. I did have a conversation with Dr. Mullaney, and she's supportive and feels like I would fit the bill so that I can continue in that role. So that my experience, my knowledge of what we need, what the representative needs meets the requirements. So.
And so you will have to fill out a questionnaire and provide a resume for the January 6th approval. Is that accurate? Do you remember? Okay. All right. And you're willing to do so. Excellent. So, thank you. Moving on, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sobel to talk about the permanent improvement levy.
I just want to start a discussion on the permanent improvement levy. In the financial area of the agenda tonight, you'll have a resolution placing or taking the first step to place a renewal of our existing permanent improvement levy on the May ballot. That levy is expiring at the end of tax year 2013, so it actually expires December 31st of this year. Because taxes are paid a year in arrears, we will collect money on that levy through all of next year. If it is not renewed, it will end. This is a straight renewal. It will not mean any additional taxes beyond what our residents are paying right now. That is 1.7 mils. The permanent improvement levy is a portion, although by far the largest portion of our capital, of providing revenue for our capital budget. Our capital budget this year was actually a little inflated because we've been holding money to pay for the chiller, which was a large expense. Normally, our capital budget will be between $1 and $1.1 million. We take in about $1.055 million each year for the capital budget, and over 2/3 of that comes from the PI levy. PI levy is paying, the three biggest items it pays for each year are textbooks, and that is physical textbooks, and also we are allowed to use it to buy electronic textbooks as long as we have at least a 5-year license. Anything we use this money for has to have a life of at least 5 years. It is a major source of our technology budget, keeping our technology up to date. It is used for maintenance of supplies, or maintenance, well, not supplies, maintenance to our buildings. It is used, the piece of the money goes to purchase music equipment each year. Those are the main uses. If we have to buy a bus at some point, we will most likely use it, for bus purchases at that point. If the levy is not renewed, we have 2 opportunities to renew it. Hopefully we'll only need one. If it is not renewed by the end of calendar year 2014, those collections will end. That does not eliminate the need for us to spend money on those items. Our buildings, while they're not ancient, they are not new, and they require upkeep to keep them in a workable manner to avoid more expensive issues down the road. We have to keep up with technology. Computers, as you know, become obsolete very quickly. We are changing over to meet the new Common Core with some of our textbooks, and we are using this money to help us move to the Common Core. If we do not have the money available to us, a lot of it will fall onto our operating budget, because we're going to have to look at it very carefully what we're spending and probably cut back what we're spending, but we will have to move to our operating budget, which then puts in peril the levy that was just passed in November and attempting to extend that levy as far as possible. So again, you'll have a resolution taking the first step, authorizing me to contact the county auditor to get a certification for the levy. On June 6th, there will be a second resolution on our
January.
What did I say?
June.
January 6th, there will be yes, I'm sorry. My brain's still on its way back.
Yes.
On January 6th, there will be a resolution on the ballot, assuming you approve the one tonight, authorizing me to place the issue on the ballot in the May election. So with that, I will open it up to discussion.
Mike, the levy that, the original PI levy that's being extended, how long has that been in place?
It's been renewed or replaced at least twice. I don't remember the first, I think it goes back into the 90s, I think, when it was first passed. It's been a 5-year levy since we've had it. It's been renewed or replaced every 5 years. And so it's going back at least 15 years, if not 20, at some point back in the 90s.
Just to give you some tangible examples of things that I think this money is critical in funding. When there was transition in leadership, we came in and we talked about the need for upgrading our technology infrastructure. All those upgrades were paid for out of this permanent improvement levy. The other thing that I think is important to know is, we worked on the high school chiller. We have other issues, like our elementary boilers are going to need to be replaced. It is an old building with very big boilers, and so the replacement of that is going to require some demolition of walls in order to get boilers out of the room. So, we know that we have some of these expenditures coming down the road, and so it's critical that we continue to have that type of funding mechanism.
The majority of people that I've talked with about this understand the difference between the permanent improvement levy and, operating expenses, and the fact that, the permanent improvement are long-term capital things, as well as really important things like books and computers, which are pretty fundamental. But I think there's always the risk that there's confusion in the voters' minds about another levy and where it comes from. So I just think we need to be intentional in our communications about this. The fact that two important things are that it's not an incremental levy, it's a renewal of a levy that's been longstanding, right? And the fact that it's not for the daily operating expenses, but indeed for those long-term investments in education, which are critical. But those are, key pieces that, we'll have to work through to make sure they're messaged appropriately. But the most people I've talked to have understood these comes back every once in a while. It's a relatively low level, it's a renewal. But at the same time, I think we really owe it to everyone to make sure it's crystal clear, what the intent and purposes are.
I agree. I think it's essential that that we provide information so people understand this doesn't pay for salaries and benefits. It's a continued investment in the business assets, if you will, of the district, the physical assets that are essential and that have a useful life that can be extended as much as possible as we do with the chiller, which I think, as I said, and on the committee that looked at that, they projected a 10-year typical useful life for that chiller. And I think we were at year 17 when we finally replaced it, if I'm not correct.
That's correct.
And so, we continue to stretch those dollars as far as we can while still maintaining the buildings, the buses, and as Thomas said, providing critical educational components, textbooks and computers. So it's going to be very important that folks take a close look at this and evaluate what we've done in terms of maintaining the structures that we have. It's really continuing to support the investment that the community has made in the school district assets already.
I have a quick question for Mike. If the board were to entertain another 264, House Bill 264 project, that would also be repayment out of the bond fund or
No.
out of the PI fund?
No, the 264 project is theoretic. What it's supposed to be paid for is the energy savings in the operating budget that that are realized by the project.
Okay.
It's not, technically, yeah, the money is transferred into a bond fund
Okay.
to make the payment, but the money is coming out of the operating budget, out of the savings from the projects.
Okay.
I think the other thing that probably is really useful to continue to reiterate is a lot of people I talk to say, oh, Granville schools, you must have just fantastic technology. I'm sure you spend lots on that, right? And those are folks that maybe haven't been in our schools to know how much we do without, right? And how much we are able to stretch our budget and things like that. There are a lot of school districts that I'm very jealous of, and in terms of how much they can invest in the latest curriculum and laptops for all the kids and so forth. And we've done a fantastic job, and people sort of assume that because of our results, we must have all kinds of money for technology, but really it's a very little money that's stretched a very long way, right? And it's very critical. Of course, we're kind of on the edge in terms of having the basic, capabilities and technologies that we need to keep up the education that we have there. So I think making that connection to this levy is going to be important to make people understand that we're not just totally fine where we are right now. We're really working the best we have, as with our operating funds and stretching those as far as we can. We've done the same with our permanent funds as well.
Okay. Board reports?
A little update on CTEC. They last week held their hands-on sophomore week, which they do every year to bring students in to try out some of the programs. And they had about 2,000 sophomores registered to come, and I don't have the final numbers, so hopefully we'll hear about that tomorrow night. But had a very successful 3 days. I think they had 3 days. The adult education was also reaccredited and got glowing reports from from the reviewers, and who noted that we received more commendations than anybody else that they had reviewed. So our adult education program is also really very strong, and that's to sort of keep in mind, because it can be an option for students. There are one-year certificates that happen after high school, so it's something, a resource to keep in mind as an option for even our secondary students. We've also had a professor, a teacher, our culinary arts teacher was named a Teacher of Distinction by the Ohio Restaurant Association and Education Foundation. And there's only maybe one of 20 in the state. She was one of 20 in the state to be so named because she teaches the curriculum, but also provides her students with opportunities to get experience in restaurants, in the restaurant industry. Just cars. So she's been very successful at CTEC. We also had a professor, a teacher named to be represent Ohio at the Health Science Master Teacher Institute in Chicago, and she was one of two to represent Ohio. So again, we have another teacher who's very highly rated. And then there was recently a competition at Muskingum University about computer games, and the CTEC has a computer information systems class at Northridge, a satellite program, and they sent a number of students to that competition, and they came home with awards such as most addicting game, best simple game, use of simple game play, and best use of physics. Those judges were from a company called First Playable Productions, which is an independent game development studio. So that program's only been there a relatively short amount of time. So there's talk that they're going to bring the competition to Northridge next year. So that's kind of exciting. And legislatively, what we've already talked about, House Bill 193, and the update that I got recently, some of the amendments, the House and the legislation is on holiday leave, so nothing's going to happen until after the new year. But some of the amendments that have been made to House Bill 193 include delaying the online assessments, which Mr. Bernath and Mr. Fry talked about, Dr. Fry, until the 2015-16 school year, and then delaying the phase out of the Ohio graduation test. So that's still, again, as we discussed, under discussion. It has been voted, it is going to be voted on the full House. It's been voted out of committee, so the House should be receiving it when they come back in January. A couple other pieces. There is still the House Bill 237, which is the one that wants to repeal the Common Core, so that's still out there being discussed. I think it came out of the Education Committee, so it should be, again, voted on the House Bill or Senate Bill? House Bill, by the House sometime in the near future, I would imagine.
And a lot of our lobbying groups have been encouraging people to continue to contact members of the House and Senate.
And we sent a letter.
Yeah.
Opposing the legislation. And then House Bill 229, which is recent, which I think I sent an email about updating people. It's to change the OTES requirements and provide districts some more flexibility in how they implement that evaluation system, which I think will be a good thing. We can, have some flexibility in how much the evaluation piece versus the added value piece counts towards a teacher's evaluation. And I think that was also voted out of committee and should be voted on by the full Senate when they get back.
Just as a reminder, we did add an administrative position as a direct result of the added requirements of the OTES environment. So I think as much as we can create flexibility, the better we are at, and I think the better quality evaluations that are going to take place. I think if you place an unrealistic burden on a person to do evaluations, you somewhat compromise the quality because you might not be able to invest the amount of time in the process. So by giving us flexibility, you probably increase the quality of the evaluation.
And I guess some teachers, if they are rated accomplished, will not have to be evaluated quite as often, so that also alleviates some of the burden that administrators. And there's some other one, you know, some sort of other bills sort of brewing, but nothing really has come out of committee yet, so that's it.
We are meeting on January 6th, right before our next meeting, for the first meeting of the new year for the New York. Nothing to report.
The Granville Education Foundation is in the midst of our annual fund drive, which derives the majority of the funds for the year. Letters were sent out just last week to many members of the community, so hopefully you've received those. And for anybody that's not, you can certainly visit the Granville Education Foundation on the web, because it's a fantastic organization that supports so many enriching activities here. Specifically, we're also looking into ways to bring in alumni, right, and make connections with alumni. So that's something that I think is the most valuable as a long-term project, where we really look to see how alumni that are still here in Granville, as well as those that have spread around the country and the world, can stay connected to the community. And that's something that's interesting to the Granville Education Foundation, and I'm sure the district as well, if we can keep that coordinated and stay in touch.
It's an excellent initiative.
Yeah.
The foundation hasn't met this month, so I don't have anything to report.
Okay, that takes us to our action agenda. Action item 10.01 is an unpaid leave of absence for 1 day.
So moved.
Kind of straightforward.
Mr. Janice, Dr. Intel, Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye, thank you.
10.02, we have a maternity leave of absence for one of our elementary teachers.
So moved. Our best wishes.
Thank you.
Second? Child number 2, right?
Yes.
Mr. Janice, Dr. Intel, Dr. Corman,
Aye.
sorry,
Sorry.
Ms. Deeds, or Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye, thank you.
Action item 10.03 is a contract for speech and language pathology services. We typically do the Kindred Rehab Services contract each year for those contingencies. They didn't actually have somebody available, so we went to Invo Healthcare because Emily Browder, our speech and language pathologist, is going out on maternity leave, so we need additional coverage. So this agreement is to cover that maternity leave.
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Mr. Janice,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Intel, Ms. Deeds.
Aye.
10.04 is the James T. and Betty Coffee Scholarship Fund, and it was a $500 grant for Mrs. Blotter's FCS and FCCLA projects.
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Mr. Janice, Dr. Intel, Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye, thank you.
10.05 is the board would authorize myself to enter into a lease agreement with the Granville Rec District effective January 2014 and solidify that process.
So moved.
Second. How long is the lease?
It's a 1-year lease, renewable.
I think it's a terrific opportunity and a great example of collaboration. Two groups that have, as both you and your development said, similar constituencies and missions. I think it'll create added convenience
Well said.
Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Dr. Rentel? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye, thank you.
10.06 is contract service agreement for a teacher of the hearing impaired. We have a student that is in need of those services. And we obviously don't keep that on staff, so we have to contract for that service.
Oh, whom, did you move? Okay, I'm sorry.
I've been talking myself.
Dr. Rentel? Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Janice? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye, thank you.
Next is the consent agenda. So I need a motion for 11.01A through C4.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Did we have?
What's that?
Oh, okay.
Yep, we're good to go.
All right, just as always, I'd like to recognize the donations and gifts from individuals in the community and organizations like Kiwanis. If you've never attended the Licking County College Fair that's hosted by Granville, I would highly recommend it. It's great to go out and, Mr. Bernath has been a leader in that initiative with his counseling staff, so they get $300 from the Kiwanis group, and our archery team received a $125 cash donation. Just so you are aware, Katie Woos is being added to the middle school ski club, but James Browder is resigning half of that position, so they're going to split the position. It's still one position. Just of note, resignation-wise, Cassandra Church is resigning all of her positions. Her husband was relocated to Washington State, and so she wants to go with him. And we have, the great aspect of this is we had a retired teacher, Ed Swope, who was willing to step in and fulfill the rest of the year for her to be able to make that transition now.
I appreciate Mr. Browder bringing on an additional staff member, because usually about 75 kids
Yeah.
are in ski club, and so having an additional staff member, I think is
Yes.
a blessing.
Yes. Very better to have more hands on the deck. So,
Less, yep.
Dr. Cornman?
Aye.
Mr. Janice? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Rentel? Ms. Deeds?
Aye, thank you.
All right, we have 3 items on the financial agenda. First is adoption of the November financial report. I guess get a motion second, then I'll go ahead and give a brief update. You'll see it is a fairly short report this month. There is not a lot going on. Part of the problem is I was hoping to do a little bit more update because the state started using our current year enrollment data in our financing. Unfortunately, I think there are some serious issues with some of the data that's being used right now. I think it is incomplete, not our data. Our data is fine. But with the new system,
good clarification.
yeah, our data is fine, but with the new funding system, what's going on in other districts is now affecting what happens to us. And I believe that there are about 3 different things going on. One, I think that there are some districts who are not fully counted in their enrollment yet. That is causing the state to look richer because of the way the state share index is calculated, which makes us look poorer, which makes it look like we're going to be getting more calculated state revenue. We're not going to get any actual dollars because we're capped right now. I believe that will all change. I believe that the numbers that are being used for our special education students are not fully up to date yet. That is a process, getting them in. I think the numbers that are being used right now do not reflect all of our students. Again, it's not going to affect our money, it will affect our calculation. The issue that I have brought up about how the state is calculating statewide average valuation has not been resolved yet, although in my discussions with ODE in the last week, I believe will be resolved in the manner that I think is proper, which would have the result, again, not giving us more money this year, but will affect the calculation and give us more base funding. That is important 2 years from now, as the formula recalculates. There is some difference in how I was interpreting the law and how the state interpreted the law as far as how they were counting tuition students for kindergarten. They have actually looked at it. They interpreted the law differently. I talked about that with them. I'm not going to fight them because it gives us more money in the way they interpreted it. Again, it doesn't give us more. It doesn't give us more dollars this year. It does improve our calculation. So that's up in the air. I think there are issues with our community school deduction and with our scholarship, our autism and Peterson scholarship deductions. Our community school deduction went up, and I'm not quite sure why, because we don't seem to have any more community school students. So I'm not quite sure why at this point it went up. Our scholarship deduction went down, but again, does not seem to be commensurate with the number of students that we have getting autism and Peterson scholarships, which seems that it should be, I think, a little more. And the report doesn't reflect everybody, and so that part of it is all in flux right now. Again, I don't know how much of it's mistake and how much of it is they aren't fully caught up. They're horribly understaffed.
And it's a new funding formula.
It's a new funding formula. They have exactly one person who's responsible for all of this, doing all of this. It's way more, despite the fact he's very good and has been there a very long time, it is way more work than one person can rightfully handle, and he has nobody to bounce anything off of. And so it's easy to not do things correctly. I put no blame on him at all. He's doing the best he can, which is actually pretty good. I mean, he's very capable of what he does, but he is just overwhelmed. And so it's going to be a process of getting all this done. If we look at just the month to date, and we take a look at what actually happened, the spending was in most areas was a little bit overestimate for the month, but we're still definitely in line of where we are year to date. Year to date, our spending on salaries and benefits are both running below last year still. They will catch up and pass ahead eventually, because we see more of the full effects of both the salary increases and the 4% increase in fees due to the Affordable Care Act that go into effect January 1st, so our insurance premiums will go up 4% beginning January 1st. So that will push things up. Our unrestricted aid is running ahead of schedule, and that's because how they've been or ahead of last year, because we are getting more money this year. Our property tax is ahead, which we've talked about in the past why that's the case. Our purchase services are running ahead. Much of that is in ESC charges, and electricity payments is causing most of that. And that's a big area that's in flux right now until things kind of get calmed down at the state level and everything gets up to date. That's really the bulk of it. Our other objects and spending, that's going to continue to run well below last year, because last year the business operations position was moved to the ESC because of the state law and was deducted out of that line item. Now that the state law has changed as far as budget, we've moved that position back here. And so that we're not going to be making payments for that to the ESC, and have not been making them really since July. And so that's going to continue to be below estimate.
Just on the purchase services, it wasn't clear. You think that's a trend that will continue, or do you think that's more seasonal, temporary?
The electric costs and the ESC costs are not really going to change. Actually, the ESC costs have been, because it was based on an earlier estimate, that's been high, so that may go down a little bit. Adjusting, the electric costs are not. The community school additional costs, those are up in the air right. Yeah, that part of it is up in the air right now. Those are really the main areas that we've had issues with.
And on the ESC cost, there's nothing really that we can do or change to sort of turn that trend on the.
A lot of it is service driven, and the demand for services. You know, if we have, you know, X number of students who need the services that we do through the ESC, and that's more than last year, it's going to cost us more than last year. I mean, that's not a, there are some issues that we're going to talk about.
Just briefly, you know, with the new funding formula changes, some of the monies flow now to us instead of the ESC like they have in the past, which had been a barrier in conversations about potentially bringing some services back in-house, because they obviously held the strings to that money. So I believe that this board and we will talk intentionally over the next year about potentially bringing some of the services that we outsource currently to the ESC in-house. And then the other conversation is there are multiple ESCs. So, you know, if there's economy of scale by moving to a different ESC, those are conversations that this board should have in the future. And I think we're going to have those conversations within the next year.
The last slide I just wanted to point out is the cash flow slide. You can see our cash flow situation in January has gotten worse since where I thought we'd be. We're back. I'm now expecting about $300,000. The main driver of that was I was anticipating an adjustment to our fiscal 13 foundation payment in November. That did not materialize. And in further discussions I've had with OD, I'm now being told it may not happen now till January, and it may not be as large as they had led us to believe it would be to begin with. And so at this point, I have backed all, you know, because of the uncertainty over both when and how much at this point, I've kind of assumed at this point we're not going to get that. And that's really the main driver in what is causing the cash flow situation in January to be so tight. I'm still anticipating not having to borrow. I know you gave me the authority to last month. We will take a very careful look at things at the end of this month and see where we are. I will make my request at that point to the county for an advance on the 25th, by the 25th of January, of our property taxes for whatever they're holding. Normally they don't give us our first advance until usually the first week of February. I will ask for it to get the cash in hand by the time we have to make the payroll payment on the 25th of January. And we'll just see where we are as we get through as we're going through the month. I think we'll be okay, but
You don't have the margin for it.
there is virtually zero margin for error. Right? This is basically the same place we were last year. Yeah, we have zero margin for error at this point, but we will do the best we can to get through it without having to borrow. And again, if we have to, my intent is to do the borrowing from our own bond fund, which will give us the flexibility to get it paid back within probably 3 weeks, to minimize the interest. We will have to pay interest out of the operating fund to the bond fund if we do have to borrow, but we can borrow at a very low interest rate from ourselves. And we will be paying ourselves. So at least the money stays within the district that way. There is enough money in the bond fund to get us through this, so I don't have to do a tax anticipation note against the new levy. Because there's more involved with that, and there's higher costs, because usually there's a term of the payment, there'll be a more formal term that we'd have to make a payment and have those go longer than if we just do it from the bond fund and get it repaid right away.
I think if there are takeaways from Mike's presentation, it's the new funding formula is contingent upon having accurate information from just about every entity in the state in order to determine the state share index and relative wealth, which makes it virtually impossible to determine and project and assume certain things that we used to be able to do in a typical funding formula. So I think stay tuned as we get more information, and we talk just about every single day because we're getting new information in how things are calculated, and we're living with a new system, and that comes there's some learning that comes along with that.
Yeah, I was hoping to do an update of the current budget situation at the January meeting. I am concerned that the data is not going to be clean enough to do it at that point, so I am targeting doing that at the February meeting this year instead of the January meeting, to make sure we have something resembling accurate data, which hopefully by February it will be the data coming from the state will be fairly accurate, so that we can make an intelligent assumptions about what is happening to our state funding over the next few years. Other questions?
My other takeaway is, again, it's important to understand what happens in the rest of the state, and I'm very thankful that we have somebody in the room that understands what happens in the rest of the state better than anybody at the state, it sounds like. So thanks for staying on top of that, because it's such a leg up to understand this, because otherwise I just have no idea how you would be able to manage not knowing what the future revenue forecasts are going to be like, so thanks.
Mr. Janice.
Aye.
Dr. Corman.
Aye.
Dr. Rentel.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye.
Thank you. The second item is, as I mentioned earlier, the resolution of necessity, and there should not be a 1 in front of the 6 on the date. That should be May 6th, not 16th. Sorry about that. So in the resolution of necessity for me to apply, send the auditor the necessary request to authorize us to move forward with the renewal of the PI levy.
So,
Any further questions on?
no, not at this time.
Okay.
I know you bring more information as we go down this path.
Mr. Janice, Dr. Rentel,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Corman,
Aye.
Ms. Deeds.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The third item, and I apologize for the lateness of getting this to you. I did give you leave a small packet, is our renewal of our banking agreement with Park National Bank. We have been operating on a 5-year contract with them. That 5-year contract is up December 31st. We are quite happy with this level of service that we get from Park, and we do like the idea of working with a bank that is housed here in Licking County and makes its home in Licking County. And so what you have are the terms of the contract to do a 5-year renewal of the operating agreement with Park. It does have a 2-year review after 2 years. There are certain pieces of the contract that have really not been updated in almost 10 years as far as our cash holding requirements, which is how the fees are determined and how the fees are costed out. That does go up. Right now, we're required to hold $125,000. That does double to $250,000, which is actually still a bargain, because if we worked through the whole math of it, I think it was work out to over $500,000. So we're moving up to $250,000, and then at the end of 2 years, there will be not necessarily a reassessment meeting. It will go up, but there'll be a reevaluation of the fee of the structure. But this will be the 5-year renewal. So a motion in a second.
So, Mike, I agree with you. I think as long as you survey the market and find what Park is offering competitive, it's preferable to me at least, and I think advantageous for the district and the community to do business with the local bank.
Yeah.
Has a history of service to the community.
Yeah, and a lot of what I like with working with Park is the level of customer service. They're very responsive to our needs and helping us. We've been doing a lot of transitioning over the last few months as we've been working towards more online payments of bills and things like that, and getting our accounts in line. And they've helped us and been very flexible with us, as we've had a couple of pitfalls that were probably more of our own doing than theirs, and they have helped us work through those without it, with keeping the banking seamless for everybody.
Is there anything substantially different in this than previous?
Again, the main thing is essentially the amount we have to hold in balance in our primary checking account, is the only real difference. In other than that, it'll be the same type terms. Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
No, I wrote that wrong, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wrote the S in the wrong place. Sorry, Mr. Janice?
Aye.
Dr. Rentel?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to move into executive session to prepare for negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment, and to consider the employment of a public employee.
Second? Go ahead. Okay, I'll second.
Dr. Corman?
Aye.
Mr. Janice? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Rentel? Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
There will be no action items after the executive session.